Good morning, everybody. Hey, I'm excited to talk to you today about webinar episode number 3, which is going to be all about deal evaluation. Very excited to do that. Now, as always, we're going to go through just a quick rehash of where we're at in the program and a reminder of the Foundation to Success. The Foundation to Success is the program that will help you be successful in any market, in any place, at any time, up market, sideways market, down market, and will help you overcome any of the things that real estate throws at you. So let's buzz through that real quickly. And again, the successful characteristics of incredible investors are visions, leverage, and systems. You have to have an incredible vision. You have to have systems in place or you'll never be bigger than yourself. And you have to learn how to leverage other people. You can't do this alone on a high level. You just can't. So you want to get this going. Focus on doing one thing, do one deal, do one thing, one time, and the world will open up to you. It's a fantastic program. Now, we want you to master the Foundation to Success, find something that moves you deeply. Here's the Foundation to Success. Here is the program. Here's what works again and again. So number 1, know the Foundation to Success. That was what our first webinar was about, was knowing the Foundation to Success and finding your red button statement. That's your why. Why do you have to do this? If you don't have a powerful why, you're not going to do this. Why must you do this? Who must you do it for? Once we have a powerful why, we're going to begin to find properties using competing and non-competing methods. We're going to analyze those properties for highest and best use and future potential. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're how to analyze those deals at step 4. Step 3 was our last session. We'll analyze those properties for their highest and best use with the future potential involved. Once we do that, we're going to write offers using the 2 OPMs. That's other people's money and other people's mortgages. Everybody typically understands using other people's money if you raise some capital. But the real thing we want to look for is the other OPM, which is seller financing. So we're going to talk about those. Seller financing and cash. Those are 2 fantastic ways to do this. Number 6, once we purchase the property, so we're going to write an offer, get it under contract, put it right back up for sale. It'll go right back up for sale. That's what we'll do there. Once that property is back up for sale, we're going to do a step 7, which is create and enhance equity. Now, this is a step where we force appreciation. Basically, whatever we saw in step 4, and we're going to cover that today, that's what we're going to enact. And I'm going to use a real-life example today of a property that one of our students wrote an offer on yesterday. I helped him through that, and he put the offer together. He wrote the offer and submitted it. We got it into the seller. Looks like a fantastic deal. We'll show you how step 7 will work through analyzation in step 4. But we force appreciation by changing the use of the property. Remember, you change the use, you change the value. That's the benefit of real estate. So that's what stops us from doing carpet and paint and wholesaling. Those are the difference makers. Once we put that back up for sale in step 7, one of 2 things is going to happen. It's either going to sell for a profit, or we're going to refinance it and maintain it long-term with an equity position for a cash flow. Now, I get asked everywhere I go, which one of those is better, Mike? Do I want to sell it for a profit or refinance it for an equity position? The answer is always yes. So if your property sells for a profit, you got some money on hand. If it refinances for an equity position, you've got a cash flow, you've got a property that appreciates. While you can appreciate it on your taxes, you have tax benefits. You've got a bigger net worth that grows over time. And I will remind you this, write this down under step number 9, long-term wealth requires long-term assets. Long-term wealth requires long-term assets. So we always want to be keeping some of the assets. A lot of my students get involved. They sell some properties. They make some short-term money. They make some big money. Some of them make big bucks. They spend that money, and then they're left with nothing. So we want to make sure we have a long-term strategy in place today, and we'll kind of go through that today in the context of this property that we're looking at. Then step number 10 is to simply prosper. So again, if we sell for a profit, we can prosper. If we refinance for an equity position, cash flow, all those great things, we can prosper. And then the good news is if we do enough of these deals, there will always be some deals selling for a short-term profit, and there will always be deals that we refinance and maintain long-term for all the long-term benefits that come with real estate. So this formula lends itself perfectly for a deal evaluation strategy. We're going to go over that right now today. That's today. So we want to make sure we do that. Now, real quickly, I'm going to buzz this in just 60 seconds, so bear with me. The red button statement is you have to have a powerful reason why. This is a business that requires repetition. This is a business that requires consistent effort. This is a business that builds over time. The more you give it, the more it gives back. And it's easy for people to try for a minute or two and then to stop. So find your why. Find your who. Now, your why is, why do you have to do this? Why do you need to be successful? Find your who. Who are you going to do this for? Why do you have to do this? So you write that statement and revisit it regularly. Here's the premise for that, the why and the who. These are my red button statements. I've gone over those in the past. I have some powerful reasons why I want to be successful right now. I have a high level of interest in redemption and building my empire again, and all the things, most of you know all the things that I've been through, very powerful for me to be successful and why I have to do this. So again, get your red button statement done. Now, once we have that powerful why, we're going to start finding properties. And again, the two ways that we find properties are through non-competing methods, which are methods that others are not doing. And I'm actually going to focus today on door knocking and driving around, because this is going to be a fantastic deal, or it's going to lend itself very nicely to a property that we found and we're in the process of putting under contract right now today. So we'll talk about that, and hopefully that goes through and everything goes well there. So these are non-competing methods, are things we do that others are not doing, or they can be things others are doing, but we do them in a different way that others are not utilizing. So that's non-competing methods. And we all know what the competing methods are. These are the standard things that you could learn in a lot of places on what you should go do and how you should find things. MLS is a powerful place to do things. There's standard searches that we use. You want to find distressed properties. Now, distressed properties are not going to have the same meaning after today, and they shouldn't, because it isn't just physical distress. We want to find these distressed properties because these are the properties that we can simply buy for a cheaper price. Now, if our whole goal is to change the use of a property, doesn't it make sense to find some physically distressed properties, because we'll have to pay less for them? If I'm going to buy a house on a lot and tear it out and build something else or do something else on it, or convert that house, it makes a lot of sense to pay less for that house. So physically distressed properties are often, two reasons I want to do those is A, they cost less, and B, if a property is physically distressed, it's typically going to be found in a physically distressed neighborhood. And if there's a distressed neighborhood, more often than not, cities are interested in seeing that neighborhood improved. And occasionally and typically, and this is why we do this program, cities, to incent developers and people like you and I to help clean up those neighborhoods, they give us zoning incentives. They give us zoning incentives and benefits so that we'll go in and do urban renewal and infill. So we'll take those properties, fix them up, clean them up, and profit from them. And the city, in a kind of a subconscious way, works very closely with developers and investors in advancing the city's goals. And it's not subconsciously when you talk about city expansion and expanding the borders and new subdivisions and those types of things, that's a concerted effort. But the redevelopment and the urban renewal, most cities, unless you're in a big city that has war areas where there's just very blighted areas, it's very hard for the cities to get things done there unless they offer pretty significant zoning and density and infill and urban renewal benefits and bonuses. So we'll take a peek at that. So again, distressed properties can manifest themselves in a lot of ways. These are fantastic benefits for us. Now, the other thing we want to find is distressed sellers. Distressed sellers are not always a key to highest and best use, because you could have somebody in $1 million house, it's a distressed seller, and gosh, their property has no zoning benefits, could be in a gated community, and the city wouldn't let you tear it out. It wouldn't make financial sense to tear that house out, and finding that distressed seller may or may not make sense. But again, more often than not, if we're going to buy a house and the distressed seller will sell it for less because they're in a difficult situation, then we get to start our highest and best use conversion with a lower sales price. So find the distressed sellers in some of the ways that we do these things here, and we'll talk to you about that. Now, here's the deal evaluation overview, and I want to kind of do this today in the context of a property that we're actually working on right now. I've got a group of students that I'm working with here in my local market These guys, one of them is a good friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years, and there's two other guys that we've kind of brought into a group that we're working together to find properties and do deals. And the other day I was sitting here working in my office, and I got thinking, gosh, I got to go down to this city. It's about 15 miles away from where I'm at. And I got to go take a look at some of the older projects that I've done. I just really felt strongly like that. And I'm like, well, I don't have time today. I'm not going to do that today. At some point when I get down that direction, I'll stop by. Well, interestingly enough, I pulled an MLS search for all of a specific type of property in the entire county that I live in. And sure enough, up popped one of the properties that I was interested in this city that I was interested in going down and seeing, but didn't feel like I needed to that day or have time. And it looked like a pretty good deal, but not a fantastic deal. It was actually two duplexes that sat on the same parcel. So you have one lot, there's a duplex on one side, a duplex on the other. The easy thought on that would be to buy the property and simply subdivide it from it's basically its current use is a non-conforming fourplex. You have two houses, and it is papered by the city, which means they do have legal permits to operate 4 units there. But the easy thing was one house was on the other side, the other house on the other side, and it would be very simple at that point to subdivide the property. And more often than not, 2 duplexes are going to sell for more than 1 fourplex. So I thought, the numbers were tight. I looked at them. I just knew the market in my head, and I thought that's a little tight. But, let's go down and take a look at it, because it also accomplished the goal of me going and look at some of these properties that I'd done a few years back. But they were fantastic properties, and I knew this area was just loaded with some of the things that we're looking for. So I get down there, I take a look at the property, and sure enough, exactly what I thought. It wasn't the best deal out there. It was interesting, and I thought, maybe I'll put a pencil to it a little bit tighter when I get back. But then I started driving around, and I just love this town because it's an older area. When cities get established, most cities are 70, 80, 100, 150 years old, depending on what part of the country you're in and where they were at in the original expansion path. Well, this area is one of the key areas that I like to work in. They're older part of town, older homes. Most of the homes were between, I'm going to guess, 80 and 110 years old. And a lot of them were on just huge lots. There was a lot of them that had 3rd-acre lots, a lot that had 4th-acre lots, and then there were some that had 1/2-acre and 3/4-acre lots. And there was a lot of them. There was a ton of them. So I'm driving around. I went and looked at some of the really cool deals that I did, and this is one part of the town where I had done like 5 deals within 300 or 400 yards of each other. It's interesting that you'll notice when you start doing a deal, one of the things I always tell you guys is a deal is a portal to a neighborhood. If you find one good deal in one good area, you want to make sure that you look around all those places, because if there's one good deal there, there's a bunch of good deals. So I'm driving around, and sure enough, I stumble across this lot that is just screaming at me, buy me, buy me, buy me. And the reason was it was for sale. It was a lot for sale at a price. It was a for sale by owner, actually, and it was a lot that was at a price of a single family lot in the area. And it might be just a hair high, a few $1,000s high for a lot in that area as a single family residence. So meaning if someone's going to buy the lot and just build their house on it, wasn't the best neighborhood because the homes around it are quite old, but it was a nice lot. And the interesting part about this this is an area of town where, as one of the zoning incentives, the city offers what's called an overlay. Now, the overlay is essentially an area where the city says, hey, if you qualify for certain things and you bring a nice project to the city and it enhances and beautifies the neighborhood, and the neighborhood's on your side, which interestingly enough, my student and I went over there. We knocked on one of the neighbors, asked them what they thought of what we wanted to do. And yeah, that would be great. Hey, we're all for that. That's fantastic. And the interesting part about this was, with some work at the city, some paperwork and some zoning things, we could build a set of twin homes there, or a duplex. So a duplex, obviously being a 2-unit apartment structure, and the twin home, in our lingo, some markets it's called different things, but in a 2-flat is what it's called in some markets, a twin home, where basically it's a duplex, but they're separately owned on both sides of the property. So with some work there and some effort, we could do that, and the property would increase in value by about, oh, I'm going to guess 45 to 65% if we had an approved set of twin home lots. So one of the things we're going to do is, we analyzed the information, we looked at it, we talked to several builders, and there's an enormous demand for this type of a property, and there's some effort that needs to go into it. But here's the thing. We're going to go through the deal evaluation overview so I can tell you if this is a good deal or not based on where we're at. And so you can start doing this on all of your deals, because if your deals pass this strategy right here, then it's a full steam ahead. This will give you all the confidence you have or need to act and be successful with this. So here's step number one, and we're going to go through these in a little more detail, but highest and best use. So the first question we ask always, is there a better use than the current one? Now, the easy way to do this, guys, is just to go to the city, get a land matrix or a land use chart or a use matrix. They have a couple of different names, but each zone, when I went to this city, they printed out the zone. There was a 3-page breakdown of the zone, what all the uses were, what the requirements were, what some of the development standards were, in a tidy little 3-page document they printed out and handed to us. Very easy. And very quickly, obviously, we can look at this area and say, hey, this is not the highest and best use. A bare lot with nothing on it is not the highest and best use. So is there a better use than the current one? Well, certainly. So the fantastic benefit here is we can tear nothing out. We don't even need to take anything out. I think there was one little tree on there that might have to come out. But highest and best use, is there a better use than the current one? Now, most people ask, what's a better use? The use being, is it a home? Is it a duplex? Is it a gas station? Is it a retail center? The best use, write this down, is typically going to be the most dense one. So if I take a basic lot, we don't even have a structure that's a lot. If I'm able to put a set of twin homes on there, which is 2 houses, what that means is I'll subdivide the property into 2 single-family lots, and then we'll build homes that are attached at the center line, and that'll be a set of twin homes. And 2 is always better than none. Now, I say none because there's no buildings on there. Obviously, it's a lot. But you can look at it 2 ways. 2 lots, meaning a twin home lot, is always better than 1 lot. So now that passes number 1. Is there a higher and better use? Now, obviously, we studied for even better uses. Is there a way to get a 4 units or 6 units? And this zone, it is a heavily residential zone, so those aren't allowed there. Now, interestingly enough, if there was a house on that property and I had to pay for a house price instead of just a lot price and tear that out and put a duplex or a set of twin homes in, it more than likely wouldn't work. I'd have to pay more for the house than a set of twin home lots would be worth. So again, just because there's a better use, if there's a house on a lot, I tear it out and put in a set of twin homes, doesn't mean that we do it. So it has to be better use and a financial benefit. And that leads us to step number 2, which is our acquisition price versus market value. With what I'm paying for the property, is it worth more immediately right now? Are we buying with equity? Now, I don't have a problem here in step 2. If I'm paying full price for this lot and it's worth exactly what I'm paying for it, but I know there's a higher and better use that has a significant improvement in the value, then that's something that I'm willing to look further at. The interesting caveat here is the change to a twin home lot is not guaranteed. It's very probable if we do it right and the neighbors are on board, and of course we'll write a contract that has the ability for us to do those things. We'll go meet with all the neighbors. We'll probably grab one of the planning or one or two planning commission members, 1 or 2 city council members, interview them, say, hey, we've got the immediate neighbors on board. We want to build a beautiful structure. We want to do this. We want to just get a feel for what you're doing. Easy to kind of hedge your bets there, but you want to ask yourself, am I paying more than the property's worth? Now, let's say a property is worth $100,000 and the guy's asking $110 and he won't budge. Does it make sense for me to pay $110 on a $100,000 property? It could, depending on what the use is. And I've actually overpaid a few times, and there's been times where there's been many, many, many times where I paid full price, even on properties that weren't even listed. And it's simply because I knew that was such a good deal that we're going to go ahead and do that. You know, most investors walk around with the mindset that if they don't get a massive discount on the purchase price, then there's no benefit to buying the property. And that's not true. We don't, if you're leaving the use the same, if I'm buying it for what it is and then going to just simply turn around and sell it for what it is, then I have to get a massive discount. And that's one of the parts of real estate I just don't like. I don't like to beat people down on their pricing. Number 3, will it cash flow? Will it cash flow short-term versus long-term? Again, we're going to use this little piece of property as an example, meaning, do I lose money having it? Do I lose money long-term keeping it? We're going to look at that. Number 4, terms. Are there any terms that can make this a better deal for myself? And these are terms on the purchase. These are terms on the sale. These are terms in other places. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. So fantastic benefit that way. Are there terms that we can put in place? Number 5, step 5, is there a future potential with the city? You know, there's a lot of properties where I know that a city change is fairly imminent. And if I can buy the property, and let's say they've got some really great uses coming down the pipe, or even a zone change or an annexation, there's things that I know are going to happen. And I always temper that with nothing is guaranteed at the city. So you always want to make sure, but you hedge your bet here with the future potential. If there's some fantastic future uses, you buy a property and make sure it cash flows. For example, if I bought a fourplex on a large lot and I knew that the city was changing the entire zoning, and the new zone would allow me to do something incredible there, and the fourplex already cash flowed, and I would buy that property simply because I knew that if the city didn't change the zoning, I'm still left with a cash flowing property. So you have to make sure there's future potentials with the city. And then you always ask yourself, does the property work in the short term, and does the property work in the long term? And then lastly, this is just a benefit. Write this down next to number 7 here. This is simply just a benefit. Is there a professional or vocational benefit and application here? Now, what I mean by that is that many of you know I was a realtor and a broker for 14 years. And many years I made an enormous commission income. And a lot of those years I made more money investing, but they feed each other. If I was a mortgage broker, if I was a contractor, if I was a subcontractor, if I was a realtor, if I was doing any of these things in and around real estate, an appraiser, I would say to myself, is there more money to be made here? And let me give you an example. If I was a real estate agent right now, could I get a commission buying this lot? Could I get a commission turning around and selling the lot later? If we developed this lot into a twin home lot and actually hired someone to build a set of twin homes and sold those, would I get 2 commissions on the sale of the 2 twin homes? So potentially I could get a commission buying the lot. I could get 2 commissions selling the twin home. That would be 3 commissions on top of the investment. And this is great strategies for builders and contractors and subcontractors and all the people that are around real estate. Is there more money to be made? So fantastic benefit that way. So let's go through these steps in a little more detail. And again, I want to go through the actual process with this lot in mind that we made an offer on yesterday. So number 1, highest and best use. Again, we asked the question already, is this property being used for its highest and best purpose? Is that what we're doing here? Is that a fantastic benefit here? Are there better uses? Because I learned a very powerful lesson that unfortunately the city doesn't always know the highest and best use. I've gone in before and asked the city, what's the best thing I could put on this property? And they didn't know. That was a very painful lesson I've learned a few times. The other thing is I've gone in, I can't tell you how many times me or my students have gone to a city and said, hey, I own this property over here on Jones Street. We're going to go ahead and make an application to do such and such. And the city simply responds back, that's not allowed over there. You won't be able to do that. You'd have to get a permission from the city council, and I'm guessing they're not going to grant that to you. At which point we pull out the zoning, we pull out the use matrix, we pull out all the things. And I can't tell you how many times we've gone in and educated the city about what uses are available in their city. And it's kind of, I hate to do that because you have to be very careful not to offend them and make them feel like they don't know what they're talking about in their own city. And some cities are more problematic like that. And truth be told, these guys are doing a lot of things. There's a lot of different zones potentially, and there's a lot of different neighborhoods, and there's a lot of nuances. So it isn't just the sake of them not knowing something or being ill prepared in their job. There's a lot. Some of these cities you go into, there's just a ton of information, especially the bigger cities. So we've had to go in and educate some of these people on some of the things we're doing. So again, we're going to take the existing use and compare it to all other uses. We kind of talked about that. Now, on a land matrix chart, there's typically a chart that shows you in a particular zone every use. So it'll typically, most cities will list all uses. And then, so most cities you'll see down the left-hand side all the uses, and across the top you'll see all the zones. And then they'll put a grid in, and you can literally go to a zone and go down the use, and you'll see typically a P, a C, and a blank. And what that means, A is, and an A is accepted, or P for permitted, I should say. P is, it's usually a P and a C. The P is permitted. If you see a C, it's typically going to be that it's a conditional use. And what that means is you have to do certain things to get that use, and that's where you want to be a little careful, because some of those are not intended to happen very often. And the city, instead of saying, hey, this guy met the requirements, let's give him the use, some of them are there to deny the use. And I sometimes wonder why it's even in their zoning if their real goal is to deny the use. So you really have to be careful. And what I like to say to my students is you want to operate in the accepted area. If something's not permitted, then you're taking a chance. You're really taking a chance. So that's an example of this lot that we're looking at with my students. And there's another lot I'm going to look at a different city here. I found a property, a larger property in an older neighborhood in another city. And I called the seller. He refused to sell his home, but he said he'd be more than interested to subdivide a piece of property off the back. And I'm going to go meet with the city and see just how much I would need to build a set of twin homes there. And maybe we can do another deal there too, and where we're at. And it's because it's in a really good zone, this other property as well. Now you want to, again, this is the simple math. And a lot of people like to make complex formulas and charts, but it's really easy. You ask yourself, how much does the property cost? Then you ask yourself, how much is the cost to change from what it is to what it can be? And then what's the property going to be worth? Now, once we take a quick look at that, then we pick the best use and we go for it. Now, in the context of this lot that we're looking at here, this is something that I don't like to do in some instances, because most cities, if the use is not guaranteed, meaning permitted, they'll fight you on it. And I don't like fighting. I always say fish that swim upstream die. You look at the salmon that go up and spawn every year and make this valiant swim up the stream to try to fertilize their eggs, and they die. And that's one of the statements I say here. If you're going to fight the grain enough times, you're going to lose some battles. So this lot, the situation here is, if we purchase the property and we change the overlay, so this isn't an entire zone change, it's a simple overlay, which means we're enhancing the current zone. So that's why we're looking at it. And if we do that, the value of this property goes up significantly. And in fact, it's very difficult to find this type of a lot in the entire county right now, the way the market's going. So we'd have a very valuable piece of property. Now, the question becomes, how much does it cost? Let's say it costs $100,000 and it cost me $5,000 in city fees and site planning and engineering and plat maps, and 3 months to change, and the resulting future value is $150,000. Do I want to do this deal? So let's use those numbers as the numbers and say to ourselves, gosh, if I buy it for 100, I put 5,000 in it and it's worth 145, I got to do that deal. Now, that's a little oversimplified, but again, we're looking at that. Now, the other question is, what if I buy the lot, or my student buys the lot and it doesn't sell? Can we sell it for what it's worth? And are we taking a chance there? And I really believe the lot is worth in the neighborhood of what is being asked. So if we had to turn around and sell it for the property for the price that it's at, I think we could get out of it at the purchase price or very close. So there is some risk here, but we feel like, gosh, the reward for this is absolutely fantastic. The reward here would be well worth the risk, and that's what my student decided. Hey, the risk is worth the reward. Let's move forward. So that's highest and best use, and that's the premise of the whole system here. Is you can spend your life trying to do carpet and paint rehabs. You can spend your life trying to wholesale buy things in distress and turn around and flip them. Or you can do those things and use change too. And again, you change the use, you change the value. So again, just to remind you, in all projects and developments, amenities equals density. Now, what that means on projects are, and this isn't a project, well, it kind of is in this situation. The city said to us, I think it'd be favorable to get that lot filled in and developed. I think the neighbors would be excited about it, but it would have to be a nice project. And I didn't say anything because I knew that. But if you build a house with a flat roof and it's 100% siding and there's no frills and whistles and bells, then there's no amenities. And the city's not going to necessarily want to do the density, neither is the neighborhood. The neighborhood's going to want something that brings up the value of their property. Now, I reminded her, and she knew I was very impressed. I had done a project about, 2 blocks over, just 250 yards away, that I had built 10 years ago. And it was all brick and stucco, beautiful project, 810 pitch on the roof, nice architectural shingles, the Amsco V70 windows, gorgeous property. We did it right. And I reminded her of that project, and she goes, oh yeah, I know exactly where that's at. And I said, whether or not you like the project, because I asked for some really nice benefits there and got them. I said, I just drove by that property 10 years later, and it looks gorgeous. It's one of the best looking properties in the neighborhood 10 years later. And she goes, yeah, you did a really nice job over there. And I said, we would build something very, very similar to that. Brick stucco, very nice, very nicely architect, the architect would draw it out very nice. So it would be more valuable, be the most valuable property in the neighborhood, and probably by far. So the neighbors would be interested. But some examples of some of the highest and best use are condo conversions. And again, usually less is less, more is more. And what we mean by that, if you take a 10-plex and convert it to 10 condos, you go from 1 to 10, a single family to a duplex, unit conversions, zone changes, PUDs, use conversions, current zoning versus future plans and floor plans. There's a lot of things that you can do to think outside the box here where there are better uses. And again, density equals dollars. Write that down for me. Density equals dollars. That's going to be the key in what we're looking at. So again, step number 2 we kind of talked about, and this is a fairly simple one. Am I buying it for less than it's worth? And the reason we like to do that, and most investors pretty much think that's the only way you make money in real estate, and it's certainly not. I've paid full price for many things. I've paid more than full price on a few things, but I would suggest 85, 90% of the deals I do are very close, within 2 or 3% of full price. And if it's going to be a use change with a profit, then I don't mind paying what someone's asking. And that doesn't mean I don't negotiate hard for the best deal. But if a property is listed for what it's worth, or very close to it, it's probably going to have a lot of activity on it. So I got to get in there and be aggressive. So is there money to be made up front? Now, this is the one little catch with this lot. It's if we buy it and the overlay doesn't happen, then we're going to be faced with turning around and selling this lot for a profit. And the other benefit is, we could simply just build a house on the lot. And then building a house on the lot with the way the market's going right now, we could profit by simply developing the lot and building a home and selling the home for a profit. So there's that. But, we feel very confident that we can get the money back out of the lot with where it's at and take a peek at that. Now, how do we get properties below market value? There's a lot of things we can accomplish. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is pretty inherent, I think. If you can find distressed properties that are distressed. Now, and interestingly enough, this property is not really distressed. It's distressed because it has a distressed seller. I called this guy to see if he was interested in selling it. I got his number and he said, yeah, I'm interested in selling. And I said, okay, I'll come over tomorrow morning and let's talk terms. And he goes, well, there's no terms. And he said, this is what I'm asking. If you want to pay it, great. If you don't want to pay it, that's your choice. And make sure you bring cash. And I kind of giggled, thinking, okay, whatever. So the next day came and we went over to his house, and he asked me, one of the first things he asked was, "Did you bring the cash?" And this guy actually expected, and my jaw kind of dropped to the floor. This guy actually expected that we were going to show up and give him all this cash, and then he was going to sign the lot over to us. He didn't want to do a contract. The guy refused to write a purchase agreement. The guy refused to take, any type of a thing. He goes, I'm gonna take this price. This is the price I want, and you're paying everything else. And if that's not what you want to do, then I'm not going to sell the property to you, and I will not sign a purchase agreement. And I said, okay, well, gosh, that's not the way real estate's done. I said I would never buy a property without a contract. So we called his title company, and he consented to do a 10-day contract. So pay cash or get out. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is this man is probably one of the most difficult people I've ever dealt with in terms of a real estate transaction. And if he didn't have an amazing opportunity here with this property, I would walk. And I had really wondered why his property was still for sale, because of the pricing of the property was fantastic. The use, the potential there, fantastic. And so I just could not believe how difficult this man was. And as we left, I turned to my student, who ended up making an offer on the property, and said, "That's why the lot's still available. That guy is unreasonable." So in this case, we didn't have a distressed property physically, but the property was distressed because everybody that called, this guy literally expected us to show up with a briefcase of cash. And the guy wanted an earnest money. It was bigger than 10% of the value of the property. He didn't want to write a contract. He finally consented to write a 10-day contract. He demanded that we pay for all expenses. And it was just a difficult scenario. So we left, and we didn't write him an offer. We had gone over intending to put the property under contract. And we left. We said, okay, well, we'll get back to you. And we went and did even more research than we had already done, even though I knew what we had there and the benefit of what we had there. So we went back and worked with him, and he agreed to take an offer, and we wrote that offer, and we're hoping to hear back today. But let's look at this. We can find properties that are better valued by finding distressed properties or sellers. Sometimes you can use a large earnest money. I've gone in before and asked for a low price, and someone will say, "Gosh, I don't think you should have a low price," and I'll put just an obscenely large earnest money. Well, of course, with tons of contingencies and issues, because if I'm going to put a down payment down anyways, I might as well show the down payment as a part of the earnest money and get some benefit. If a typical $100,000 property has a $1,000 earnest money, you usually look at 1 to 2%. Some people do less, some do more. And let's say I go in with a $20,000 earnest money. The seller, and if the seller has an agent, is going to look at that and say, "And this guy's serious. This guy's a player. This guy knows what he's doing." Nobody writes a $20,000 earnest money on a $100,000 property. And again, if I'm paying cash for the property, or I have a large down payment, or I have an investor, that's okay. And again, I'm going to paper that thing up with a bunch of contingencies, so I'm not losing that $20,000 until I'm certain it's a fantastic deal. So that's one way. Cash offers, obviously, quick closings, buying multiple properties. This guy did the classic. He said to us, I said, you're right at the value of where your property is, and I don't like paying full price for properties, especially when there's a couple of things that we need to deal with. And he goes, "Well, if you buy this property, I'll sell you this other one over here at this price." And in his mind, it was quite a big discount for the other property. So sometimes that happens. Now, we haven't looked in too far to the other property, but my sense was his other property wasn't that big of a discount. But we can take a peek at that. So oftentimes, I've got lots of students that have stories where you always want to ask that as you're putting a property under contract, do you have anything else that you're interested in selling? And usually they'll come out with that on your own. The other thing is you can take out some of the contingencies. Now, you don't want to take out some of the contingencies. Like, I would never take out seller's disclosures. I'd want to see the seller's disclosures. That doesn't mean I wouldn't buy the property as is, as to physical condition. You never want to take out the contingency that they're going to give you a free, clear, marketable title with no liens or financial encumbrances or anything like that will not get taken care of at the title. But you can buy as is. Say you're looking at an old house and they say it's in horrible condition, and You can take those contingencies out. In fact, a lot of the wholesalers know that because the banks make you do that. You don't buy it as is. You can't do that. And in some parts of the country, they won't even let you go in the house. You buy it as is from the street. And that's how clearly they want you to understand that you're not going to put contingencies on the property. So you want to make sure that you have the proper contingencies, but if a deal's good enough, meaning if I'm got a little old house on a big lot and I'm going to tear the house out, there's no chance on this earth the house would stay in there. I don't really care about the conditions of the house. Now, I might go in and make a big deal out of it in my negotiations and say this house is horrible. It has this, it has mold, it has that, it has the other thing. It has all these things, and I've got to have a better price. I've got to have a better price, and they give me a better price, and I remove the contingency. Well, I was planning to tear that house out anyway. So, and I like to do those with houses that are normal problems for someone else, like mold homes. We drove by looking in the city the other day. One of the houses I did that was a meth house. There was a meth lab many years ago. And I usually stay away from those, but I spent some money on an inspection. It was a fantastic price. Spent some money on some inspection and found that the damage from the meth lab was just very, very minimal. And in only one part of the house. And so we went in, bought the property, and immediately cleaned out this one little area, remediated the kitchen and dining room. And the rest of the house was great, and it was a great little rehab. We flipped it really quickly, and that one didn't have higher and better use. Now, I normally wouldn't have done that deal, but it just begged me to do it. It was a quick, easy profit, and we did it. So that's number two. Can I buy it for less than it's currently worth in this moment? Here's an example, and I think you get this. What's the future potential of the property? What value can I create? Here's the simple formula. Those are the things we're going to do. We want to make sure you look here at the bottom. You want to make sure that your equity position is going to be more than 20%. Now, here's the reason why. If I buy the property and it doesn't sell and I have to keep it long term, I want to make sure that I can refinance it for an equity position. And I like 20% on residential and multifamilies, 4 units or less. I like 30% on land and, well, actually 30% on commercial and retail, mixed use. And I like 40% on land, simply because I can go in and refinance and have a big enough equity position that the banks will look at it and say, yeah, we'll pull a long-term loan on this. And I would have done my numbers in advance saying, you know, if I build this set of twin homes on this lot, will it cash flow? We'll go through that whole part here in a minute. Will it cash flow long-term? But I want to make sure I have a big enough equity position. In this instance, in the numbers you see here, a 26% equity position is enough for me to sell. It's enough for me to sell. And this is after real estate fees. So you notice the closing and holding costs there. This is enough for me to do some incredible things and still have a nice profit available. And this was numbers from a deal that I actually did in the Phoenix area. So fantastic figures there, and you can make a great profit doing that. So again, we can take a look at the cash flows. I'm going to look at this here. The cash flow is unique in that, let's take an example of cash flows, and then I'll show you kind of how we penciled through this on the cash flow. So cash flow is basically this. If I buy the property and I have to pay an investor, or I buy it with my own cash, or I get a mortgage on the property, does the property income support that expense? And this is where things get a little tricky. Because let's say I buy a piece of land, let's say I buy 10 acres, and I subdivide it into 40 lots. And in that 40 lot subdivision, I turn around and sell 40 lots. Well, guess what? There's no income on that property. I buy that 10 acres, and it might take me 3, 6, 9, 12 months to do the full subdivision and development and the subdivision of the property, and go through all the city processes and get the bond in place and put all the streets, curb, gutter, sidewalk, all the improvements in. There's no cash flow there. So does that property cash flow? Absolutely not. So you need to make sure that when you're raising capital, that you either have your capital become due well after the project's done, and give yourself lots of time to do that. So there's no expense. Most private capital I raise on that type of a deal does not have a monthly expense. There's no monthly payment. Now there's interest that's accruing, but there's no monthly expense. So you need to make sure that you have cash flows. Now let's use this example on the lot. The lot here, if we buy this lot, it's not going to cash flow. Right? There's nothing we can do with the lot. We can't set up a lemonade stand there that'll produce enough money on that corner to over offset the cost. So the question becomes, if I can do this little zone change in 3 months, and if the property sells for a profit, great. If it doesn't, I can build the set of twin homes there in the next 4 to 6 months. Those will sell for a profit. If they don't, the real question becomes, if I rent both of those twin homes out, will they cash flow on my long term? When I refinance that and keep it long term, will those cash flow? And that's where we want to take a peek at, because we can put money in place that expires or becomes due when the project's done, and or well after. Give ourselves, if we need 6 or 8 months, we'll give ourselves, if we need 12 months, we'll give ourselves 18 months. Give ourselves plenty of time, but you want to make sure now on cash flow, make sure you cash flow long term. Now on cash flow, here's another example of that. Let's pretend there's a little house on that lot, and I'm renting the house out. So if I bought that lot for $100,000 and my debt service was $600 a month, and that house rents for $1,200 a month, then the $1,200 a month rent in the house is going to offset the cost for the $600 interest to the investor. And even if that money's not due till the end, I might actually pay the investor throughout the term. And if I promise the investor interest at the end and I pay them the interest during the term with the rents, they get really excited about that because you're doing more than you expected. So consider your cash flow. One couple of things we can do here: we can increase the rents on cash flow. We can get more rents, get more income, or decrease the expenses. And this is how we improve cash flow. This is a whole different strategy here. But again, are there ways we can do this? And I've actually bought properties before that are simply a cash flow fixer-upper. I've purchased properties before, many times, that were multifamily properties. I run lists of, and I'll tell you a little bit here, write this down, of properties that have been owned 10 years or longer by the property owner. And the reason I'll do that is, if somebody's owned the property 10 years or longer, I usually find that the rents are 10 to 20% low. And the reason is, long-term property owners realize that if their rents are slightly low or quite a bit low, people never move. They don't leave to go pay more somewhere else. And the reason you like that is hey, I'll be 10% low on my rents, because if somebody moves, then I got to spend $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $7,000 to rehab the apartment that they've been in for years. And even though I can get a higher rent with a rehab apartment, the higher rent is going to take potentially years to offset the costs I just spent rehabbing the apartment. And by the time it pays for it, that's probably going to be ready for another rehab again. So most long-term investors, especially if they don't have professional management, most long-term investors are 10, 15, 20, 25% low on their rents. And if they've owned them long enough, the rents go up so much anyway that they can be 15% low and still much, much higher than what the rents were when they bought the property 10 plus years ago. So I can't tell you how many of these deals I purchased that way and simply gone in and done a very light remodel, raise the rents to 95, 98% of what the current market is. I always like to be a little bit low. And then when you raise the rents, you change the value. Your cap rate changes, your value changes, and those are some fantastic deals. And you can turn around and sell the property for more money right away. Or you can go into the bank and show that it's worth more, because banks are very in tune with value on a multifamily income property or a strip mall or a mixed-use facility that you own and are renting out. They're very in tune with the capitalization rate and the cash flows. So if you go in and say, gosh, I've got 80 or 100, let's make the numbers easy, 100 apartments, and I raised all the rents $200 a piece, that's $20,000 a month. And the bank will have to acknowledge that in a value change, as would the market. If you simply, and let's say it's this easy, you simply bought a property, raised the rents, and put it back up for sale at a new price with a, say I bought it at a 7% cap and the rents were at $1,000 a month, and I bought it and raised all the rents to $1,200 and raised the value significantly, but put it at a 7.5% cap. Now I've got a very valuable asset that's going to sell in the marketplace. Or whatever the cap rate is in your market, you'll want to adjust that. The other way we can increase cash flow is by decreasing expenses. So we want to make sure that we can do those. Here's some quick ways we can do this. We can do this by increasing rents. With the cash flow, cosmetic stuff, appliances, gosh, there's places where you can put in dedicated parking. You can put in covered parking. I had a facility where I went into a larger complex and said, hey, how many of you guys would would pay more rent and I had, I think, 30 apartments. If I said, I'm going to put in 10 covered stalls, made those stalls for people that want to pay more rent to have a covered stall. And they went like hotcakes, and they went for enough money to raise the value way past the expense of the covered parking, and it raised the value of the whole building. So I was getting paid to put an asset in, and people were very excited about that. So you can go in and put covered parking in, more covered parking. You can raise the rents, and some of these things you can do are just for create scarcity. If I've got 100 apartments and I put in 20 covered stalls, and I assign those to people that are paying more rent, I can profit. Washers and dryers, can't tell you how many times I've had apartments with washer and dryer hookups in them, and I have tenants that don't have washers and dryers, and I will rent them washers and dryers, used washers and dryers. I'll go buy used washers and dryers and I'll pay a little bit more to have the warranty on them, the 2, 3, 4-year warranty we want to shoot for. And then I go and rent them out. I very rarely will not get enough rent to cover the cost of in 6 to 10 months. If I raise the rent enough to pay for those, now if I have 20 apartments and 6 sets of my own washers and dryers, those become cash flows. Those become cash centers for me. It makes more money. We've actually had projects where we've added a daycare, and you'll want to do that on a bigger facility. So if you can have enough income in a daycare than a unit, it might make sense to convert a unit to a daycare. Now, you wouldn't want to permanently convert that. So if someone bought the building down the road, they'd have to spend a lot of money to convert the unit back. So leave the kitchen in and some of those things. You can do better floor plans, bedroom, bath additions. You can add a pool, better landscaping, air conditioning. There's a lot of cool things there. Equity Builder program, that's a program we'll have to talk about on a future date. But that's some of the things we can do. Here's some of the things we can decrease expenses with: tenant labor, multiple meters, tax evaluation, increase efficiency in windows, insulation. There's a lot of things that we've done here. Solar is one that you might consider. It's a real mixed bag, so make sure you do all your homework on that. But lots of ways to decrease expenses. Now the fourth term is terms. Can we get a better deal with terms? And I actually use this as a deal evaluation. If we get better terms, terms equal value, terms equals profit. So some of the terms that we might look for are seller financing, wraps, that's a subject to mortgage combinations, extended closings, listing agreements, assignment clauses, assumptions in the seller financing, seller partnerships. And if you don't know what all these are, don't worry, we'll cover this when we get into seller financing in some great detail. But basically what we're saying here is all of these things are going to make the property more valuable, because again, if I go sell one of these properties and I can offer these things to other people based on the fact that I already have it, then it's a fantastic benefit that way. So seller partnerships, seller investments, access before the ownership, interest rate delays, the delays in payments or interest rates, get a better rate, get a delay in payments, discounts, prepayment bonuses, prepayment penalties. Now, a prepayment bonus is the opposite of a prepayment penalty. I'll ask someone, hey, would you do a 30-year seller finance? And most people are like, no way, no way. Well, what if I do a 30-year seller finance with a 5-year balloon, which means I have to pay off in 5 years? Okay, well, that's a little more interesting. And typically I'll negotiate that and try for 5 years, push hard for that. But a lot of times I'll do a 30-year seller finance mortgage with a 2-year balloon, because that's the time it would take me. If this guy was seller financing on this lot, for example, and we did 5, 10, 15, 20% down and seller finance the balance on a 30-year term, but with a 1-year balloon, everything that we're doing with this project gets done very easily inside of a year. So it wouldn't hurt me I would plan on selling this for a profit or refinancing it for an equity position well within a year. So one of the things that I do is I'll say, hey, and they might say to me, well, I guess I'd do 5 years, but it makes me nervous because I want the money sooner. And I said, well, you know what a prepayment penalty is, right? And they'll say, yeah. I said, well, why don't we do the opposite? Why don't we do a prepayment bonus? And most people say, well, what's that? I say, if you want me to pay you off sooner, put a carrot there. Put a carrot there. And what I mean by that is, what's a bonus? How badly do you want that? You want to do a 1%, 2%, 3% discount, or whatever. make a bonus there for me. And if there's a carrot there, I'll pay you off sooner and we'll both win. I get a little bit better deal and you get paid off sooner and you're out of the deal. So prepayment bonuses are actually fantastic. I always try for prepayment bonuses that are longer than what I need in my deal evaluation and use change strategy. So those are fantastic benefits there. You've got some great options with that. And obviously you can do a prepayment discount as well. Now, number 5, I think is pretty easy. And this is not one I want you to take a lot of time with, because again, we don't like doing deals where we're hoping for something to happen and we're not sure it's going to happen. This is just kind of a bonus. Write this down. This is just an added bonus. What is the city, county, and state's master or future plan, their 5 to 20-year plan? Now, I usually don't get to the county and state's master plans unless it involves transportation, unless, I found one piece of property once where I heard in the 5-year plan there was going to be a new off-ramp from highway. And you can imagine a change in value if you've got a freeway or a highway, and in the 2, 3, 5-year plan, there is a funded off-ramp. Now, that's still tough because I see things get defunded all the time. I wouldn't buy a property that had no benefit to it, that had no cash flow, that was a loss, that was upside down, that had issues, that didn't have any current better uses, and then sit there for 3 years and cross my fingers that the off-ramp came, and then I would make a bonanza. Now, if you had a bunch of money laying around and you were willing to risk that, then certainly you could. But this is kind of a bonus. I would buy a property and say, gosh, if that's the case, that it might be, I might say I bought a property that cash flowed and it took care of itself, and then maybe I even paid full price for it, but it was still a pretty good investment, but that there's an off-ramp coming in 2 years, then I would seriously consider just sitting on that property and seeing if it comes true, and it wouldn't financially hurt me to do so. So what developments are proposed in the area? I like to keep my eyes on the city planning meetings, the city council meetings, and the big developments that come through. Let me give you a quick story on that. I was down in Vegas one time, and I took 13 students of mine down to the city just to kind of show them all the cool stuff that you could learn at the city. And we were kind of looking around. They have a big room down there because it's just a huge city. And then there was this big, huge trash can, actually 2 of them next to each other, that were full of plans, building plans and development plans and site plans. And I asked one of the city workers, is that garbage right there? And they go, yeah, that's just getting taken out. And so I took my students over to a table. We just started pulling them out one by one. And it was pretty cool to see. And I said, here's a bunch of developers that you might want to work with. Look at the architect information, the engineering information. If you're going to do one of these types of projects, these are great people to contact. Now, the interesting thing was there was this huge, thick plant. It was about as wide around as a small pizza. I mean, it was probably a 15-pound plan. We pulled this thing out and unrolled it, and it was a Walmart development. And Walmart is all about real estate. Walmart makes money on what they do in their stores, but Walmarts are known for buying a ton of real estate, and they own and develop everything around them, and they bring a lot of business. And I said, gosh, how powerful would it be if you knew where there was Walmart coming and no one else knew? Because they had kept it kind of a hush-hush and it hadn't been to any of the public meetings yet. People could go in and buy some property there, and if it cash flowed and a big Walmart center came in, that could potentially change the value depending on how close that property was and what kind of use it was. So what zone change are coming, annexations, value increasing stores, those types of things, is there a future potential? But again, write this down next to number 5. It's a bonus. It's not a requirement, and you never just make an assessment on this alone. Again, number 6 kind of comes back to number 5. Does the property work in the short term for a profit? Does this property work in the long term for an equity position and a positive cash flow? As a new investor, make sure your investments work in the short term and the long term, and that's not just new investors, and any type of investor. If both areas don't work, don't do it. Just don't do it. And it says here on the form, drill down further and make sure your short-term or your long-term plan is literally fail-proof. And there's always going to be a chance that something's not literally fail-proof, even something that is literally fail-proof. So you just want to make sure. You want to make sure. Now, I've taken some chances on some properties before, but it's typically been when I had a lot of slush fund money or I had massive cash flows on my portfolio. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. And for many, 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 many years, that went well. Now, most of us experienced in the massive crash of the real estate market, we saw a reality we had never seen in our lifetimes before. So you want to just make sure that you work both short-term, both long-term. And let's be honest, if the market drops 40, 50%, 60%, there's not a lot you can do to get through that. So you got to make sure that the one thing you want to do is make sure your assets are separated from each other. They're compartmentalized in different structures so that if something gets difficult in a bad market and you have to trim the tree and something goes bad, you don't lose the entire portfolio. So down here at the bottom, bulletproof investors do deals that work in the short term and the long term. So we want to make sure that's what you're doing, short term versus long term. Now, again, the last thing we'll talk about on this part of the deal evaluation is your professional vocational realtor application. Is there an added benefit here? Are you in and around the real estate market? And if you're not, that doesn't mean you don't do real estate. There's tons and tons of people that are not tradesmen or professionals or licensed or whatever. But there's just an added bonus there. Now, I can't tell you how much commissions I made the 14 years as a real estate agent and broker. I made an obscene amount of commissions on deals that I was doing the work on, and they were my project. So if I bought a 20-unit apartment complex and kind of converted to 20 units, then who's going to list those 20 apartments? I am. If I'm a lender, who's going to hopefully do the 20 loans there? If I'm a builder, who's going to remodel? I'm going to buy that and get to remodel the 20 different units. I actually just spoke yesterday to a friend from high school. We ran into each other on Facebook, and I called him and he said, Mike, I want to get involved in your program. Fantastic program, and I've got all this building background, and I want to specialize in strategies that lend themselves to my expertise. So, this lot, let's use him for an example. A friend of mine was the one buying this property. He'd buy the lot, he'd do the zone work, and he probably wouldn't be real interested in selling the property quickly for a profit if he knew that he could build a set of twin homes there and make the short-term profit on top of the building fees that he would make for the building profits for the 2 twin homes. And he just recently got his real estate license, so he could list his own twin homes too. So he'd get the twin home commissions, he'd get the building fee for building the units, and he'd get the profit for the lot. So that's a situation where, an average person might go in and say, this is a pretty good deal, but that's not a fantastic deal. And this one happens to be a fantastic deal, but it's a pretty good deal. But where if I'm getting paid a commission to buy the property, 2 commissions to sell the twin homes, a building fee in the middle, plus the profit on the lot, you could be looking at 30, 40, 50% profit there in that scenario. So is there a benefit there? Is kind of give you a preview for next week, but I want to go back to this particular lot and this scenario and go over the deal evaluation here. So here's the question. Let's run through this lot. Let's assume we have this lot. And what I want to do is run through it, and we'll run through this real quickly on this lot. So here we go. Real quickly, let's do this. So is there a higher and better use? Yes, of course, this was being used as a single family lot. It has a very strong potential for two family dwelling there. So absolutely there's a higher and better use. We have to take into account there that it's a conditional use. For the city's in favor, we build a very nice product. I don't think that's going to be a big issue. And we can sell the lot, we think, for what we're getting it for. So worst case, we have 2 options. We can sell the lot and get our money right back out again, because there are no lots for sale in this area. Or we can simply build a single family home and make a profit that way and cover enough money to get that back. So is there a higher and better use? Yes. Second question is the acquisition price versus the market value. I think we're paying right about market value for this. And again, this isn't an end all here, but yes, absolutely, we can do this. We're in the ballpark for where we're at on that. Cash flow, does it have a cash flow? And this is a no. Initially, there's no cash flow. Now, the real question here is, so if I buy the lot, is there a cash flow? No, the lot doesn't produce money. If I spend 3 or 4 months getting the zone change or the overlay done, is there a cash flow? No. If I while I build the set of twin homes, is there a cash flow? No. Again, you want to make sure your finances are in place to take care of that. But if I finish the twin homes and they sell, great. If they don't sell and I rent them out long term, is there a cash flow? Yes. If there's a strong cash flow there and we're certain of that, then we proceed with the cash flow, as long as our financing is in place for that long-term supposition or requirement. Terms, we didn't get any terms here. And again, because the upside is so strong, we didn't get those. And again, this isn't a must. This is just an enhancer. You can make some fantastic benefits that way. I've actually done some terms fixer-uppers before where I'll go in and negotiate, for example, I'll purchase a piece of property at a 30-year mortgage. I'll do a seller finance, 10% down, seller financed with a 30-year mortgage and a 5-year balloon at 4%. And then I will make the mortgage assumable, or I'll buy it with an LLC. And then I simply turn around and sell the property with a 20% down, and oftentimes with a higher price, a 20% down. So I'm going to raise the value of the property, say 10%. I do a 20% down at 8%. Now what that allows me to do, the 20% down on the sell will give me my 10% back that I put in as a down payment, and will give me a 10% profit in my hands. But if the original mortgage was at 4% and somebody comes in and assumes it, or I allow them to wrap it, because most sellers will not put a subject to or a due on sale clause, then I can sell a property for 8%. And if I'm getting paid 8% and the mortgage beneath me is being paid 4%, then there's a 4% spread. So if I buy $1 million property, 4% on that is $40,000 a year. 8% on that is $80,000 a year. So I could get my money back out, get a 10% profit, and then turn around and collect 4% interest on that loan for several years at least. And that's a great deal. That's what we call money without assets, assetless, paperless income, which it's mailbox money. You get a check every month and off you go. So you make that mortgage assumable. You make it so there's no due on sale clause, or oftentimes with those, I'll buy that with an LLC, and then I'll simply sell the LLC. Instead of selling the property, I'll sell the LLC, and the LLC comes with a 4% mortgage, but they got to pay me a 4% difference. So there's some really cool ways you can set that up. Terms are fantastic. There are no terms on this, but we're okay with that because, again, the upside is so bright. Future potential. We didn't get this far with this because this is not, there's not something we're going to want to do here over 2, 3, 4 years. We would never build typically a set of twin homes and hold them. Now, if I was at the beginning of a rising market, I might do that. I might buy and build these twin homes and hold them for 5 years. If I felt like the market was going to go up 10, 15, 20, 30%, then you make the profit from the original standpoint, and then you make the appreciation as well. Some of the markets you guys are in are pretty flat. Some of them go up very quickly, and there's parts of the country that are very cyclical. If you're near the top of the market, you don't want to do that because they'll come back down again. If you're near the bottom of the market, you want to take a peek at that. You know, some of the bigger markets, California, for example, that is one of the most cyclical markets in the nation. They rise so quickly and then drop so hard. And you got to know where you're at in that cycle while you're developing and investing and doing these things to make sure that you're riding the wave properly. Short-term versus long-term. Again, let's just run through this lot real quickly. If I buy the property, does it work in the short term? Can I sell it right away, get my money back or profit? If the answer is yes, we're good. Long-term. So that in most deals that we do with use changes, there's a long-term, a longer term, and a longer term. And what I mean by that is if we buy this property and we take 3 months and develop it into a twin home lot where we can build 2 properties, that's the long term. So over 3 to 4 months, if we can do that, can I sell it for a significant profit? And the answer is yes. And is it a significant profit, even factoring the expenses on the paperwork? The answer is yes. So the longer term would be once it's developed, if it doesn't sell, then if I build the twin homes, can I sell it for a profit at that point? And if the answer is yes, and I can get a builder in there and sell it for profit, then absolutely we'll do the deal. Now, the longer term, or the longest term, we should say, is does it profit for me? If I keep those, will I have at least a 20% equity position so I can refinance them, rent them out with a cash flow? Will I have no mortgage insurance? And I can keep those assets for as long as I want until I want to sell them. Now, if the answer is yes on all of those things, then we can go ahead and feel very confident in moving forward. So that is the the breakdown today for the deal evaluation strategy. Start evaluating your deals. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions on that. Next week, we're going to talk about your area of expertise. Get your book done, because again, just as a real quick preview, this area of expertise is where I was. Now, and this is not, remember, I got the feeling I should go down to this area where I'd done some deals and drive around the area. And I got there and I just realized just how wonderful of an area that was. And I went ahead and started looking at properties. And it's not a normal area of expertise for me. It was a former one. I used to have 4 or 5 area of expertise because I just spent all day looking at these areas in different cities. And it's just a beautiful area. So we'll teach you how to do that, how to find that area, and then you're going to master it. You're going to spend a lot of time there and do some fantastic things with it. So I want to wish you happy investing. Couple of things. Make sure you visit the Facebook page often. Make sure you get to our website on a regular basis, wealthfollowsworth.com. Great website. Lots of good stuff there. And we'll see you next week. Have a great day.